Good afternoon. I have the
Sorry?
can you edit that out? All right. I have the esteemed pleasure of introducing my colleague. My name is Professor Stoll, if you don't know me. I'm introducing Professor Edwin Cruz-Rivera. He is from the island of Puerto Rico, and he will gladly say that he is from Puerto Rico, soon to be the 51st state. And so,
you really went there.
So, he was talking about how excited he was about it last night. So, he got his bachelor's degree from the Universidad de Puerto Rico. He then went on to get his doctorate at the University of North Carolina, did postdocs at the University of Guam, the University of Southern Mississippi, and the University of Texas at Austin. Yes, I do know that. He is also a published poet. So, things nobody knows about him. So, he is going to talk today about this extensively long topic, and without further ado, Professor Edwin Cruz-Rivera.
Well, thank you, Professor Stoll. I'm done. You just said everything that I was going to say. So, well, at least I know that half of my class is here. I have to point out there will be no extra points for attending this talk. But it's nice to see you here, especially with a title like this, which you know where it came from. But for the rest of you, I thought it would be a little bit of fun to do some historical play here. A long time ago, your book wasn't really worth reading if the title of the book wasn't longer than the book itself, and that was the case of Darwin's. Now, if you ask anybody who's Darwin, they will know. If you ask them what's the name of his most famous work, they'll tell you The Origin of Species. And everybody remembers that, except that is not the actual title of that book. When he published this in 1859, and that by itself is an interesting story because he was not going to publish it. He was sitting on this manuscript for over a decade. This guy went all out. The title of Darwin's book is actually On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. And the ones that are biology majors know that part, because it's the natural selection part that is really important here. But that's not the title either. The title is On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. That is the entire title of the book. And of course, you all know the story. This is about how species form. But how do professors form? That is a question for which no academic books have been written yet. So I'm going to try to throw some ideas at you, at least how marine biologists evolve. And for that, we have to go to the beginning. Long time ago, in what seems like a galaxy far, far away, my family started putting some crazy ideas in my head. Now, you have to realize, I come from the island of Puerto Rico, and like any Latin American country, Christmas is big. And one of the things that happens in Christmas is that we have these pieces of land crab there that we harvest and eat. We have in Bangladesh, you have marine crabs. We have land crabs that we actually go collect from the mangroves and grow them in pens. We feed them corn just to clean them up, and they're delicious. In fact, they're so delicious that we almost drove into extinction. We're very good at doing things like that. But when you grow in an island like Puerto Rico, Christmas is a big thing. And part of that Christmas ritual, I come from a very big family. My grandmother had 8 kids. And I'm the only one who's only child. So I got like 40-something cousins. Now you have to imagine 8 households with multiple children going to one beach and taking over. It was like storming Normandy. This was unbelievable. And then on the afternoons we would go crabbing. And this was happening. This was like a ritual while my grandmother was alive, as long as I can remember. The other thing that I inherited, now these are all pictures. This is my mom in the center. But the other thing that happened as I was growing up is that my mother had all these plants. This is the backyard of my house in Puerto Rico. All these are orchids, and my mom has always been fascinated with orchids. So I grew up with flowers, and at one point, in fact, I got so fascinated by orchids that I had about 110 different varieties in my garden, in my house. That's something that I haven't done in a while because I lived in the desert for quite some time. But I'm hoping that here, now that I'm in Bangladesh, I can get to it. So I had a lot of influence from just basic observations. You know, everybody becomes a naturalist when you live in a country in which the beach is right there. It's hard to hide from it. Puerto Rico is an island that's like 200 kilometers long by 60 kilometers wide. So you can throw a stone and it's going to land in water. It's impossible to run away from the beach there, because if you run away from one, you're going to end up in another. So think about this for a second. I live in a country that is surrounded by water. Beaches are accessible. I come from a family that goes crabbing every winter time, which in fact is very much like winter time here. It's like 80 degrees in the mountains, Fahrenheit. And then with a mother that is sort of not a naturalist, but as close as you can get when it comes to orchids, because she's been growing them all her life. The question is, how come not every Puerto Rican is a marine biologist or a biologist of some kind? But that's not what I'm focusing on. My story began there, and as far as I can remember, I was always surrounded by nature in one form or another. If it wasn't the beach, it was the countryside. If it wasn't the countryside, it was the lake. And if it wasn't the lake, we would find a way of having something green inside the house. So my mom naively thought that would turn me into a medical doctor. She didn't think that very well. She didn't think that plan through. But this was my upbringing. And if I was to tell you what was the moment that made me decide to go specifically for marine biology, it had to happen somewhere between the 70s and the 80s when this guy was really famous. Jacques Cousteau, a French explorer, sort of put in the forefront scientists. He was one of the first people that actually made science available to the general public. He had over 150 different TV specials, and he was instrumental in developing things like the tanks that you use for diving. In fact, the initial scuba, the self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, he was one of the people who coined that term. He actually developed the first non-cyclic breather, you know, what you know now as a tank and a mask and a system like that. He was a pioneer and a trailblazer in this. And as I was growing up, every weekend there was a new special by Jacques Cousteau. Of course, he was French, so in Puerto Rico we would get them in Spanish, you know. So, but most of the specials were in English. It was really weird years later to see some of these in the original English dubbing, because I realized how bad a translation it was at some point. But the fact is, the man is a legend. The man actually made the sea accessible not only to scientists but to the general public. At one point, somewhere between the 70s and the 80s, I was like, aha, I found what I wanted to do. Of course, I didn't know how I was going to do that. So, what I'm going to tell you is, towards the end of the talk, I'm going to give you a map, and I'm going to show you what the road looked like in order to get where I am today. That's going to be fun. Why be a marine biologist? Well, the best way I can explain this to you is that when you're a marine biologist, you kind of have two workplaces. Now you have an office that looks kind of like this. This is my office upstairs. The squid did not come with the office. I bought that here. My other office looks like that. It's a little wetter. It's also warmer, but it is a lot of fun. Now, the entrance to my office, what would be the road to the building and the lobby in office number 1 looks like this. In office number 2, it kind of looks like that. Not as much solid ground, a little sandy, sunny, but it's okay. The lobby has a mixture of decoration between sand and water, so that's always convenient if you're a marine biologist. Sometimes it's calm, sometimes it changes and it's not very friendly. Now the road to work kind of looks like this. This is a picture actually from one of the balconies in my building. So you can tell that this was either hard-out or really, really early in the morning. In my other office, the road kind of looks like this. These are pictures of the Nile. Of course, you know that most rivers go to the ocean. So there's the metaphor. The view from my window is kind of like this. Actually, I have a witness that this is actually the view from my window because I was actually caught taking this picture. The other window view looks kind of like that. So it's kind of nice. So that's my wife over there looking at the ocean and the breeze. So it has its perks, I would say. But the most interesting part, no offense, Kevin, is when you look at my office. Very nice people that I relate to every day. But the dress code in my other office is a little bit more interesting. And the thing about it is that you get folks that are always kind of formally dressed, like these butterfly fishes from the Red Sea. You get to know celebrities, like Nemo's cousin right there. And those that you can hardly see because they're transparent. They're very small. These crabs, these are actually from the Red Sea also. These are about a centimeter wide. So that's a very, very close-up zoom right there. Now, everybody, when you think about marine biology, we have a really bad reputation in the general audience. You know, people think, oh, so what do? You look at fish or you study dolphins? Those are your two options. Well, neither one. That's what I do. No offense to those marine biologists that like large things. I mean, there's a lot of fun in looking at things like Cape Fur seals or turtles. Green or loggerhead? What's that? Green, right? Okay, that one's from Hawaii. There is one thing to be said though. When you work with small things, you don't run the risk of one of those things coming and trying to eat you. That's a great white shark. That's an actual picture of a female great white shark from Mossel Bay, Australia. This is an area where they do those cage dives in which you strap on a tank and put on a mask and then they sink you in a cage and then put bait out because apparently that's fun. So you get to see the great whites very, very, very close. Instead of going for the large, I've always been fascinated by the hidden, by the small things that you do not often think about, but they tend, in fact, to be the most abundant and, in my humble opinion, the most interesting. Like what? Things like flatworms with all these colors, or sea slugs with their own sets of stripes and bright colorations. And the question is, okay, what happened? Why is that so important? In the case, to not go into too much biology, all these colors have a purpose, all these colors have a reason. In many cases, that means don't eat me, I'm toxic. Because many of these animals produce very nasty compounds to keep larger things from eating them. Some of them, masters of camouflage like octopus, and if I was to show you the series of pictures, in that octopus, you can see the color change from one frame of the camera to the other, from blue to green to this kind of greenish olive brown. So a lot of very small things that you often do not even notice. And the smaller the better for me. I have been studying organisms that some people don't even know they exist, and the reason why you think of that is because you would need a microscope to look at them. Many things that look like shrimps are very, very small. I am fascinated by these, but I think there's a lot of lessons to learn, and I try to make those lessons as accessible to my students as possible. So one of the things I really like to do is to take my students to the field and have them discover. So basically, the way to discover on something like this is you grab a piece of alga or you grab a bunch of rocks and then you just start turning things over. And trust me, when it comes to the oceans, something is hiding always somewhere. And that's a lesson that I always learn. Sometimes it's the babies of the larger organisms are really interesting, and sometimes it's the adults. But I can tell you everything, and sometimes it's the parts of larger things. I can tell you everything there is, and I can give you all the books in the world and tell you, okay, organisms work like this, and this is a scallop gill, and scallop gills are really interesting because they work in a certain way, and they have this sort of conveyor belt shape, and they're really, really interesting, and none of that will match seeing. That's a scallop, and that's the close-up. But in reality, this is what really shows you what it looks like. That's a video that one of my students took. This is through a microscope, looking at a living, functioning scallop gill. And what you see, all these hairs that you see here are these hairs on the surface, and all these have a function. So there's no book in the world that can match going and seeing the real deal, seeing the actual thing. And I told you at one point or another, I was going to tell you how I got there, how I did all that. So bear with me on this one. I was born in Puerto Rico. If you see, you cannot see. So it was pretty small. So we're talking about the Caribbean. And I was born and raised there. So I didn't leave my country until I went to graduate school, which happened in North Carolina. While I was in North Carolina, I had the chance to actually work for some projects in the Florida Keys. But I went back to North Carolina, and I actually got my degree. So I went to Guam. And if Puerto Rico is small, consider that Guam is like a third of Puerto Rico in terms of a square area. So while I was in Guam, which was at the University of Guam, I spent 4 years, I actually had the chance to start talking to other people. And among those people were some conservation biologists that were in the island of Babaldao in the Republic of Palau. So every summer for 4 years, I spent about a month in Palau. But during the time that I was there, I was always also able to work in Bali, South Australia, Spain, Italy, and Israel. Eventually, my contract ended at the University of Guam, and I wanted to be closer, so I found another temporary position in Mississippi. Then, another one in Texas. While I was in Texas, I started a project in collaboration with some colleagues at the University of Hawaii. Then I moved to Egypt. While I was in Egypt, I started some collaborations with some folks in Greece, and for the past couple of years, and also Kuwait, and for the past couple of years I've been going to South Africa. Those flatworms that I showed you are actually from South Africa. There were a couple of pictures from South Africa as well, and I'm planning on going back this winter time again. And then, the strangest thing happened. I heard of a position in Bangladesh, and I was like, the Indian Ocean, one of the major oceans that I've never done anything in. So here I am. As you can see. not a straightforward line. It's not a straight line. When you're doing the kind of stuff that I do, the fun is not really on where you are, but on the opportunities that you get as a result. And thankfully, I've been able to work with really nice people all over the world that have similar interests. So if you're lucky, you can get money to go and do these kinds of things with people that know more than you and learn from them. And hopefully, you can transfer that to your students. Oh, okay. It's not as fast as the one in my classroom. Oh, that's going to be embarrassing. Now, for those of you who have plans to go to grad schools, it never is fun and games. And if you think that being an undergraduate student is difficult, if you multiply that by infinity, that's graduate school. There will be times that you will be so glad that you don't have a life. Because if you had one, you would be trying to shoot yourself. So how do you keep that balance? The one thing that you should always remember, those of you who want to go and continue your studies past the bachelor degree, is that no matter how much you love what you do, it doesn't matter what it is, no matter how passionate you are. And I am very passionate about my marine science. I would have never been able to survive graduate school if I had not expanded and tried to vent in doing other things. Some of those now, in hindsight, look very embarrassing. Like, for example, doing guitar recitals and then finding out that more than 10 years later, the newspaper still has that picture. This is actually a newspaper picture from a recital that I gave at Chapel Hill, and a couple of pictures from Texas when I was jamming with one of the bands. What's sad about this is that after that, all I was reduced to was karaoke, because I couldn't get a band together. I also did a lot of theater, and the interesting thing about that is that I started in theater at a low point in my life. I was in Texas, it was complete change, I left a lot of things behind, and I was getting pretty depressed. It was a completely new environment, I didn't know anyone. I started hanging out with artists, and if you ever hang out with people who are artists, like actors, you can always tell who's an actor because they will act out the conversation when they're talking to you. It's like every word will be enacted somehow. It's either with the hands or with the face or with the body. And it's like they never cease to act. So I started hanging out with some of these people, and I always was interested in acting. So finally an opening came, and there was auditions, and I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be great." My life right now is going to be, my life right now is so confusing and so low that it's going to be nice to pretend to be somebody else. So I got the role as a manic depressive alcoholic. That was my first role. I don't think I acted all that much during that day. But things went uphill after that. This was actually the last show I did. By then, this is a play called Four Guys Named Jose and Una Mujer Named Maria, which is about the influence of Latin American music in American culture. By this time, I was just happy that I wasn't casted as Maria. That was good enough for me. There is a rhythm to life. There is a rhythm that I've learned to enjoy. You know, we like all this, shall we say, all these distractions. But in fact, you can learn a lot from things that become your hobbies. Like, for example, how to appreciate nature a little better. Now this is a decorator crab. You won't see it until it starts dancing. Now the crab is about 2 centimeters long, and they do a couple of things. I told you about theater, and I told you about music, and musical theater was the last one. Now, these guys cover themselves in seaweed, and they do that to conceal themselves. And you can see that it's actually taking a piece of alga here, and they just sort of mouth it a little bit to rough the edges, and they have these hooks in the back, and they just put it in the back. But why do you think it's dancing? Well, this is inside a tank, but in nature, water is always moving, and so are the seaweeds that these guys grow on. So what they do is that they mimic the movement of the waves as they're doing it. Now, there's something poetic about that. I appreciate that. I like the fact of thinking as these guys that's doing musical theater right now. There's also a lot of posturing and theatrics in nature. This was a video done by some of my students, as a matter of fact. What you're seeing is two hermit crabs fighting over a shell. Now these ones, hermit crabs do not make the shells. They steal them from the nature. Actually, the shells are made by snails and related organisms, and then when they die, they're left behind. The crabs don't make a shell. What they do is that they stick the rear end into it and carry them around. Now there's a hermit crab here that is kind of outside the shell, which is very unusual because they have a soft on their belly. They don't like to expose. There's the bigger one over there. And this guy has been sort of kicked out and evicted from that one. The larger hermit crab is like, look, this is mine now. Now, look at how quickly one is going to change from one shell to another. So inspecting. And there it is. As dramatic as it sounds, and there's a lot of behavioral display and posturing in hermit crabs, all of it is theater. They hardly ever hurt each other. It's all about size and chemical cues and being, displaying as the baddest one in the bunch. That's pretty much it. Now what I like about this video, in reality, is the end of it, because unfortunately, I don't know how to speed it, but it was done by my students. This is not my video. It was actually done by my students. And in the end, it says something like, we dedicate this video to all those animals that we murdered and dissected during the invertebrate zoology class. In the end, when I look back, I enjoy what I do, but it really would mean nothing if I was not able to pass this. These are some of the students that I have worked with over the years, and or I am working with. Among them, Diana is right now in graduate school. She's the one playing with the jellyfish right there. Tamer is in France doing a master's in the marine biology. Rachel is in Scotland doing her master's also in marine biology. Mahmoud just came from the Max Planck from an internship. Mohi is at Birmingham University right now, starting his master's as well. And I would be remiss. And Adam just got accepted 2 weeks ago in Edinburgh. So good things keep on happening. I would be also. I'm going to take a second to pay tribute to the memory of one of my crew. Ahmed was one of the people that was murdered when the Egyptian military opened fire and killed 500 people overnight a couple of months ago. That was exactly the same day I was flying to come into Chicago, to come to Bangladesh. So it took me like 3 days to get here because things changed very quickly and it wasn't safe. Ahmed had been accepted for a master's degree in marine biology in Turkey. He was going to be leaving in 2 weeks to start his master's degree. So, just wanted to say that because I always carry him as one of the most enthusiastic and sort of one of the people that I've taught that had the greatest potential to be an educator. That was really his passion. for me, it was a great loss. But why do we do this? Well, it's because you reach immortality. People talk about having children because as you have kids, you pass on your genes and you become immortal. Well, I don't have any children, so I have students. So my immortality comes to either stupid pictures like these and passing on that knowledge so that others carry the torch. But the sea was always there. It doesn't matter whether I was into music, theater, that was my counterbalance, but the oceans were never too far away. And of course, later on, what became really important was to remember where everything came from. Kevin mentioned this. I'm surprised you actually know about this. I published my first book of poetry in Spanish when I was 24. I'm just going to give you the ending of the translated ending of one of these, and hopefully some of this will say something to you. We're beautiful and gross, elegant and soft, the sum of parts and more we could have ever imagined. Life is our song to claim, the hills of a fantasy and the terrible lies of happenstance. And so we are left to find the drunken truth that makes us and the things we cannot meet. In other words, we're all more than the sum of our parts. So find your own voice and do it in as many directions as you can, and take the ones that you like. And now, finding someone to do this with is what makes it worthwhile. And my wife is going to be joining me, so maybe she's going to be the one giving you the tale, or doing her own tale next semester. She's going to be teaching yoga, hopefully. So if you have any questions about any of these strange little critters, I'm happy to answer any questions right now. Thank you for coming. Not everybody at once. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about your time in Hawaii?
In Hawaii. Hawaii was cool because I was beginning faculty at Jackson State, and I had a $1.8 million collaborative grant with Stanford at the University of Hawaii. Not too bad for my first one. The problem is that I accepted the job, so I was able to go 2 summers in a grant that was 3. I accepted the job in Egypt, and under the understanding that the grant would be transferred. And then NSF said, no, we don't fund you. So Hawaii, I was mostly in Oahu. I didn't get to travel much to the other islands, but I did get to see a lot of Oahu, like the entire coast. It's not that big, but it's not the smallest island either. There's a lot to see. I love the people. It's the only thing that I don't love about Hawaii is the prices. It's incredibly expensive, and the traffic can get very cheetah-like, very unpredictable.
What would be some of your beautiful moments or special moments when you were, because you do a lot of diving, and it's interesting, thank you so much. We had the story of your life, but actually, since you spend quite a lot of time in water with these animals and stuff, what would be some of your special moments of
Wow,
life?
I can tell you one of the scariest moments I've ever had, and that happened in Palato over there. Well, there's 2 that come to mind in Palato because they happen very close to each other. There was a place that we used to dive called Ulam Channel, that is like an underwater canyon, and you can only dive it when it's in between, when it's either high tide or low tide, because the moment that the tides begin to shift, it becomes like a water jet. So we really needed to collect something, and we went down. It was perfectly calm, and like in 2 minutes, we were just clawing our way out of this underwater, but literally grabbing the bottom and pulling ourselves out because it's the equivalent of a wind tunnel except with water. But we were diving out of the reef, and it is always a bad sign when you're in a coral reef and it's teeming with life and it's fishes everywhere, all kinds of colors, and all of a sudden, and everything disappears. And I was with a guy called Dave Ginsberg, and of course you have a mask, you cannot talk, but we look at each other and you could sense the fear just by looking at our eyes. So we look at this, and it looks like this gigantic shadow in the distance that starts getting closer, and we're sort of instinctively, because we're not planning this, we cannot communicate other than by hand signals, and we're just kind of getting closer and closer to the reef. And it was actually a manta ray that was coming, but just gigantic manta ray is one of the most beautiful and majestic things in the sea. But it's a scary thing because in the distance all you see is a giant blob, and it's moving weird because they don't really swim like a fish, they kind of fly. So this thing's just getting bigger, and when we finally figure it out, it was nice. It just went glided above us and just did it about face and disappeared. But there's many. I mean, I've seen. There's what you see in the field, and you go like, man, I really wish I had a camera, especially a video camera, because I've seen some really weird behaviors that have never been documented. I just spent these are the times that you go like, you're swimming and you just sink at the bottom and go like this, and people don't know what you're looking at. You're looking at something like this, doing something weird, like maybe a fish or a crab or something. And I have a lot of moments like that, but there's also what happens when you come to the lab and you find the things that you didn't expect. Right now, I'm working with this Russian group. Those the grayish things that are there were actually electron scanning micrograms. So I'm sending these samples to 2 colleagues in Russia who are the ones who actually know how to do this. That animal we discovered it by accident, and it had only been seen once before in 1928, the time that it was described. And then there were no notes about it. It was described by a guy called Jan Stock. And one day we were just cutting open some specimens, and there it is. And we don't know what it is. It took us that's actually part of the thesis of Mohi, the one who's inventing it. It took us 3 months just to figure out what it was, because it doesn't look like the group that it belongs to are called copepods. It doesn't look like any other copepod on the face of the earth. You couldn't even relate it. All you knew that it's it looks like a crustacean of some sort, and not even. So moments like that are exciting from the biological point of view. They may not be very sexy in terms of the touristy point of view. It's not like I can put this in a brochure and go see the microcrustaceans. But from a scientific point of view, those moments, those aha moments are neat, and there's a lot of those.
Edwin, what small critters are you looking at in Bangladesh besides these?
So far, these are the only small critters that I'm looking at. It takes a while. Fortunately, I have experience from being in Egypt for 4 years. It takes a while to do this kind of stuff in a place where there are no clear government channels. Because in many other places, and you're regulated for things like collection permits, and you go to a government office, you do a summary of what you're going to do, and you get a permit. And there's more access. You can go to places, and sometimes they're marked or sometimes they're not. In a place like Egypt, you need a network of people that know where to find things, because you're not alone. In a place like Bangladesh, it's very much like that. So one of the things that I was telling Fahim in the last tale is that I was really interested in talking to this guy that worked with the refugees, because he seems to have connections in the Sundarbans, which is one of the main reasons why I came here. That's one of my goals is to work with mangrove communities, because Bangladesh has the largest mangrove system on earth. It also has the longest beach on earth. So who knows what I'm going to find there in that very long stretch of Cox's Bazar. But the Sundarbans that was one of my setting points, one of my main interests in coming here. And the moment that I came here, I went to the ESA meetings, the Ecological Society of America, a couple of months ago, when the mangrove ecologists found out that I was moving to Bangladesh. It was like wolves, it was like, really? Come talk to me. The guys from the Smithsonian were like, So that's one of my main foci. That's like priority number one is to try to get some donations.
Your acting skills are pretty good too.
Yeah, but the place here are only for the students, So where's Ian? Any other questions? Oh, you have.
That was my question.
Okay.